Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And once again, we have a very special guest. And before I introduce our guest, Tom Pickering, for those of you who are here for the first time, this Future Fast is an effort to bring people who are doing things, who are working on things which are bound to have an impact on the future. And the idea of these conversations are to try to understand what are they doing, how do they see the future, how are they preparing for it, and uh, what are the things or the flags that if they identify something, and possibly we can take a cue for or a tip perhaps for our own businesses and life, and see how we can look at it and essentially better prepare for the kind of future that we are going into. And also there will be some near long term predictions as well. And the whole idea is to get more people to start thinking about the future. So, having said that, we will get down to bringing our guest today. So, Tom Pickering is a multifaceted personality. Uh, he's a zero carbon champion, if I can put that, and he's been consulting. He's been advising a lot of businesses. He's been a turnaround specialist for a fairly long time. And personally, he's been a cycling enthusiast. He also has a business. Perhaps we'll also talk about that. I get him to talk about it in the course of it. And he is also part of a fund which is essentially to encourage zero carbon initiative. And we'll perhaps also talk about that. And he's a person, he's one of the voices that I thought we should bring and perhaps get more people to hear. And that's why, we have Tom. And Tom, thank you so much for making time to do this with us and being here. Welcome to Future Fast. What do you say about Zero Carbon Fund? What do you do there in Zero Carbon Fund? This is Dubai based, right?
What was that? Say that again, sorry.
That is Dubai based, the Zero Carbon
Fund.
So
I founded a business in the UAE called ZeroCarbon Ventures, and effectively what that business does is it takes technology, and the UAE are running COP28, and it creates showcases in the UAE. So if you take methane's a very big challenge with oil manufacturing, because oil manufacturing gives off a lot of methane. So this machine that I described, taking methane, converting it to hydrogen and graphene, is a very attractive process. So we set up that pilot, we funded that pilot, we created the showcase, we get the customers around it, and then we roll it out to actually make some substantial difference to different very direct challenges in the UAE. And the UAE is a very interesting place. They're actually leading on climate change. They're very progressive. They're very ambitious. Ambition is very important. And the challenge in the UAE is completely different, because in the UK it's relatively cold. It's about keeping things warm. In the UAE it's about keeping heat out of buildings. So it's about air conditioning efficiency. So we introduced some technologies around air conditioning efficiency to again showcase, so effectively to fund that transition and build the right partners. Because what happens in a lot of these situations is there are some and also commercializing. So we took this technology. I was a CTO and chaired this business, and the critical thing, this business that we set up, it's actually in the Economist magazine. It got a lot of publicity. But we took this technology from Cambridge, and because I've got a very capable technology team, we commercialized this project, which had been in development for 10 years in about 6 weeks. So we commercialized it to make it safe and contain it and tie up all the loose ends and get some proper process control in a super fast timescale to then move it to the UAE. So you're managing different levels of risk and augmenting the team to make these transitions happen seamlessly as possible. And also making sure the accountability for the contractors with the supplier. But the one major differentiator with these projects was, guess what it was, Nanju? Guess what the one main differentiator with these technology projects was?
Oh.
Making a profit.
So, but you funded it. I mean, the fund, is that a social fund then? Is that an impact fund where you fund it?
It's a UAE centric fund. So it's a UAE centric fund. So it's based upon
who's backing it? I mean, their intention is only to explore this kind of idea.
They're basically bringing these technologies into the UAE.
Right, but they're still far from sustaining, right? I mean, you from a business point of view.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Middle East have got some huge challenges, and they're very proud people. So they've really got an ambition to resolve these issues and develop their economies away from oil. So it's a 30-year, and it's a 40-year project. This is to make the transition away from oil. So the UAE are very keen on, doing what they can to lead in this space to take their economies away from oil and build, sustainable infrastructure.
So all this money is part of trying to figure out and explore and hopefully hit on something big in the future.
Well, but it's also about managing risk. So it's about raising relatively small amounts of money to make profit.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, so relatively small amounts of money per project to set up a showcase. So you're talking of hundreds of thousands of pounds, not millions of pounds. Okay.
Okay.
Set up a showcase.
So who are these guys who come and set up a showcase? I mean, they from businesses.
The right partners in the UAE. So the government, UAE government, oil companies, people like that. So they're all, there are lots of organizations like ADNOC.
So it's not like UK companies going there and setting up, or you basically help those local guys to.
We're providing an infrastructure. So if you were a technology supplier in the UK, we would take your product and showcase that in the UAE to fix a problem. Okay, and we'd provide the industrial partners to implement that and integrate that into the UAE infrastructure and fund it. Okay, and come up with a commercial model to make that happen and make sure the accountability. So you're accountable for your technology, and there's a contract that said, look, you supply these things, and we'll find the route to market. And the other thing about this is it's a relatively small amount of money. If it doesn't work, you can stop it, right? So so some projects, a lot of projects should be stopped or refined. So if you take graphene, for example, graphene is a very long-term project in aerospace, concrete, a lot of certification, a lot of long time frame projects. So, but the focus, the main focus was the offload for the graphene. And if you're making a profit, right, Nanju, it requires a lot less money to get, because you're generating cash, which funds itself. It sounds like utopia, but it's so obvious. If your focus is on profit, which it is, you need to rate, so developing that, launching that business and actually creating a very valuable business with very small investment. What enabled that was our focus on making profit.
So who do you think are doing something in this zero carbon space that you think are really worthwhile to follow and are likely to make significant impact in the future?
Yeah, I think good question. sadly, I think some of the things I've just talked about, like protecting places like Bangladesh, I think there are some projects going on there which are really very resourceful and very interesting. They're building, a lot of it's around building to protect the environment. So I think that's not without hope, but we really should be focusing more on that. I think the main things are creating indigenous sustainable industries around electric vehicles. So we talked about electric batteries for vehicles, lithium ion batteries. It's about taking your model in India, Nanju, and making that work using your own lithium, focusing on making a profit, considering the infrastructure, getting the right partners together to get that decision making right.
It may be about 3 years away, 3 to 5 years at best.
Yeah, but it's about getting the right quorum together and actually doing it on your terms, okay? And which is a very difficult thing to do. So you be literally attacking you to make sure you don't succeed, or they will attack you at a time of their choosing. So if you look at the way China operate, I mean, the compatible personal computers. Do you remember that? I don't know how old you are, but in one blow, they killed the PC industry because Lenovo had 10 years worth of development on a PC, and they dropped the price by 30% and killed the industry. They killed IBM overnight. They'll do the same thing with electric vehicles. In fact, they're already doing that. They're reducing the pricing already. And what's interesting is they're attacking so early, because they've forced Tesla to reduce their pricing by $9,500, and I'm absolutely sure they'll kill Tesla. And their ambitions, and they've got, because they don't play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules.
Tesla is quite a good or ahead at technology, right? Is it that easy to kill Tesla?
Yeah, but they still play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules. And China will hit them in the same way they'll hit them like IBM. IBM were a good business, but they will just destroy the market, and they've got the ability to destroy the market, and with a view to, the profitless growth models, which we cannot compete with. So I think to answer your question, I think these industries are hybrid. There's a national strategy per country. The one for the UAE was completely different to the one for India, completely different for one for the UK, completely different challenges. I think there needs to be what we created was a investment infrastructure to process the technology and evaluate the technology and scale the technology and get the right partnerships on board. That's what we created in the UAE, and that's what India needs. It's what the UK needs. It needs a central infrastructure that is technologically and investment focused to make these things happen. Otherwise, you get a whole raft of stupid ideology and projects that will go nowhere. Or you'll find people saying, yes, well, the guy, I mean, this investment panel, he said, there's a guy that said to me, sitting next to me, he's a professor. He wasn't a stupid guy at all. He said, we need the government to subsidize hydrogen so it's cheaper than diesel. No, you cannot do that. You've got to make sure it's not a sustainable thing to do. And physically, it's just impossible to do. So it's very important to get the strategy right to launch industries in a way that generates wealth in India, Nanju. Otherwise, we're on a route to nowhere, and that's quite a difficult thing to do. I think it's said about hybrid strategies. So electric vehicles do play a part, but so do fossil fuels. So it's about reducing ideology. It's also about upending, litigious, some of the litigious stuff. So a lot of the legislation is very ideological. I think that because it's going to fail, because the EV only strategy is going to fail, it'll force legislators to actually adopt electric vehicles. Fossil fuels. And I'd like to see more investment in foreign countries. We're going to look after the rainforest. We've got to reduce consumption. But actually, a lot of this I mean, coming back to my cycling business, a lot of this stuff actually you can do at grassroots level. Every time you buy something, Nanju, you can ask yourself the question, you and I individually take total responsibility in buying this. Do I need to buy it? Can I fix the thing I've got? You know, and I live in a very wealthy part of the UK. Everybody's got new cars. I've got 20-year-old Volkswagen TDIs, right? And I'm proud of them, okay? And I don't need anything else. I was offered a Tesla. I would not want a Tesla, right? I would not want a Tesla because, you know, it's actually going to make my carbon footprint an awful lot worse because my 20-year-old Volkswagen TDIs are written off ages ago. The damage has been done in making them.
Right.
So,
but because they're so old, I think they'd be a little more hazardous from a point of they would be very old engine capacity, right? So they'd be pushing more hydrocarbons to the air.
well, not relatively speaking, it's probably 0.0 with 26 zeros, 1% of the UK. It's 5x or nothing, relatively speaking.
Too small.
So we've got to get perspective. So it's, yes, of course, it's not the latest, but actually it's still high pressure fuel injection system, still very efficient engine. So it's not the absolute latest, but you know, it's the difference between 50 miles to the gallon versus maybe 60 miles to the gallon. Emissions won't be quite so good, but it's so irrelevant, you know, that gap. It's not saying that it shouldn't. I'm not saying it should be in an inner city. I'm not saying that at all. I don't.
Are there businesses working on convertible kits for these kind of old cars, the traditional fossil fuel cars to become electric? Are there any businesses like that?
Not that I'm
Have
aware
you come
of.
across any?
Not that I have actually. I mean, the ones I've come across, when it comes to economics. I mean, I've looked at one actually. Someone actually contacted me, a sports car manufacturer in the UK, looking to do exactly that. But the cost of doing that is fairly huge to get the certification, do the design, do all the engineering. So, but it just wouldn't make any sense whatsoever to do that because your carbon footprint would go through the roof just in buying the batteries. So it wouldn't make any sense because batteries are very much more integral part of the structure than they are anything else. So, and also be extremely unsafe because you've got 800 volts sitting below your, you know, seat somewhere, or maybe on your roof. So if you had an accident, I wouldn't want to be sitting in that car. You know, a good chance the whole thing would go into a lithium ion inferno. So it's not my wouldn't be my focus.
Well, Tom, I always ask my guests, are there people who influenced you in making you the way you think? Are there, I mean, somebody in the family, or teachers, your colleagues, or are there people who kind of influenced you in your thinking?
Yeah, I've always tried to do,
because you're a business guy who's like an activist.
Yeah, I've always tried to do the right thing, Nanju. So there's always a cost in doing the right thing. I think I've always been courageous. I mean, my family are courageous people. My grandmother was unbelievably courageous. So I come from a pretty courageous background. In fact, behind me is a picture of one of my relatives, which is, you know, he was a real engineering pioneer.
Oh, so you have a background, so you have a different background. I can feel it.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I come from a long line of industrialists. Either work or they don't. Nanju. It's you know, if you're making aircraft, you have to get it right. You can't not get it right because it falls out of the sky and someone gets killed. You know, if you're making a car, the brakes have to work. You can't have a factory where components don't fit into the circuit board. They have to. It doesn't get to the end of the line. So there's a certain amount of rigor which I cut my teeth in, in the automotive industry in the UK, and it was exceptionally good. exception, and there was no such thing as no. So I came from an environment where there was no such thing as no. They were very systematic, as well as being very aggressive from time to time to resolve issues. So, and if you stop a car plant, it costs you a lot of money. It used to cost about £40,000 an hour if you stop a car plant. So the car plant would go bust in 2 or 3 hours. So that's a level of focus in terms of service. In terms of, and at the time I worked for Lucas Automotive, and there's a few heroes in that business. I've got a guy called John Parnaby, who's I think dead now, but a great industrialist. John Harvey Jones is another one who you might know the name of. A phenomenal bloke who had a certain moral compass, and it was sort of talked about the same sort of things like my top 7, about doing the right things for UK, doing the right things for people, generating wealth, making profit, you know, and I'm sure he'd turn in his grave if he saw a lot of the technology that was happening currently. You know, some of the parasitic technology which I described. So I think those are the sorts of influences, and I think it, you know, I've also noticed, I've seen a lot of businesses get into trouble or take shortcuts or take some steps that were never going to succeed. So I guess I've learned a lot from, you know, from hands-on looking at businesses in a very short space of time to evaluate just like that whether or not I want to have anything to do with these businesses. So I do a lot of due diligence for venture capitalists, for example, and it doesn't take me more than half a day to really get to grips with whether or not the business is viable, whether or not the commercial model.
Well, what kind of businesses would they be?
Everything, automotive businesses, manufacturing businesses, technology businesses, banking businesses, everything.
Oh, okay. Here, Tom, see, you obviously have a very strong opinion on electric vehicles, and your investor asks you to do a due diligence on an EV startup, electric vehicle startup. How would you approach it?
Yeah, good question. Making a profit and relationships. So if I look at you know, so for example, I looked at the economics of British Volt, and the one big question which they haven't resolved is how they're going to make a profit, right? So if you set up a big car plant, if you set up a big plant making batteries in India, how are you going to make a profit? Not now, but in 10 years' time or 5 years' time. And actually, is that industry going to be viable? And actually, what type of battery should you make? And I think that is a really difficult problem to fix at the moment, because there's so many different technologies in that space. It's very difficult to know which horse to back. So I think a lot of it's around collaboration, developing partnerships with people, and orchestration, and so to be an orchestrator, the company in the UAE we created, because we were very competent on a number of different levels, we could orchestrate, right? Because we knew what we were talking about. We had the experience to do it. Very difficult thing to do that. And because if you're moving into the automotive market, you have to orchestrate with the automotive OEMs. So you have to say, look, you know, I will orchestrate this vendor base to supply you batteries, which is the most incredible hubris. So or competence, one or the other, in order to do that. And of course, you know, Volkswagen currently are vertically integrating massively into the supply chain, so they're not going to do all that themselves. So how would you persuade Volkswagen to work with you to supply them electric batteries, for example, when they've got their own plan? So this is, I think,
well, incidentally, they are one of the players who are also getting into hydrogen.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe they are responding to the market where Toyota has made such big announcements, so these guys also have to keep up. I don't know, but that's another company who's also talking. But while they continue with the electric vehicles, they'll also be coming up with hydrogen fuel.
Yeah, I think, as far as I understand the Toyota hydrogen model, it's for the top end vehicles.
Currently that Mirai.
But
But
I think it's
what they have announced is for Corolla, which is the
Yeah, like
economy segment.
I don't see those economics at all. and I don't think I'm missing anything either. It sounds very unhealthy to say that, but the basic physics, I look at this from basic physics perspective, like, you know, storing hydrogen, etc. So these decisions are really critical to get right. So I think those are the sorts of decisions that are going to be made. And actually, then you need a team of people. So I talked about the top 7, where you've got intimacy between a group of people to refine that decision making, because obviously things change, new technologies come on board. And so you've got new technologies which come on board. You've got to showcase this stuff, a bit like the UAE, you've got to get some results, get some profit as soon as you can, sell something to get to know that market intimately and develop relationships with customers who are actually selling things to customers. And so I think that's really critical. And it's the same with this hydropower project. And I think what's unique about the current situation is you need to look at this much more broadly, and you need to orchestrate much more widely, you know, with far greater partners, including government, etc. So, you know, because the amount of power as well that, you know, these battery plants use, the battery plant in Italy uses 3% of Italy's power, right? One battery plant, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the sort of thing that people need to know. So that's a government related issue. Are they going to give you 3% of their power for your battery plants? Yeah.
Is there a published report on that or anything, or is there something available on any place that you have written an article about or books?
I've done a lot of analysis on this stuff, but I've got various different things. But these are the sorts of, all I'm doing is I'm just identifying some critical, you know, some of the big numbers and some of the critical thinking, which often doesn't come out of these discussions. So these plants use vast amounts of power. And so, you know, EVs being, you know, big utopia, it's the big implication. So
correct.
you orchestrate. So if you're setting up a battery plant in Italy, you've got to orchestrate with the government to give you 3% of their power, as well as all the other issues. And you need support from the government to keep China out as well. You need an industrial strategy to try and do that. Otherwise, you're going to have to be very smart to usurp China's technology. Because one thing I'm absolutely clear on is that you need to be very smart, very hybrid to win this game and actually deliver results. And I'm not suggesting at all that you keep China out and just develop a non-competitive industry. You need to earn that place. But so you need to be very switched on and very good at making things happen very, very fast. So if you take that project, going back to the UAE, we took some very relatively complex, relatively potentially dangerous technology, made that safe in about 2 months, which would have taken about 3 or 4 years. And if that had taken 3 or 4 years, that opportunity would have been squandered and that profit. But because we got the first plant into the UAE doing that, producing graphene, that's the first graphene plant in the UAE by a long way. And if we'd taken years, so speed is the main differentiator, Nanju. It's the ability for experienced people to look at a problem and say, either that's going to work or it's not going to work, or it's not going to work, not take any shortcuts. Because I think the unique thing about the world we live in now is that shortcuts are going to kill you. You know, we don't have
that is, all this you're saying is good from a industry or entrepreneur or business side of it, right? But much of it is all coming from a response to the consumer needs and consumers' perspectives, right? I mean, there is a narrative built, people are buying. So, but how do you bring in a narrative of zero carbon, right? From a 360 degree, what you've been talking about. How do you make sure that a common man understands that? How do you get the story made available to everybody so that they start questioning, so that governments are not driven by lobbyists? So how do you make that happen?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think you have to start doing the right things, and you have to lead. You have to communicate consistently.
No, but they don't even realize that they're not doing the right thing, right? So how do you bring get this 360-degree view? Should we start from school? Where do we get this kind of a thinking that, okay, if I buy this iPhone, what are the things that go into it? Where do they come from? How are they made?
I think
Versus, okay,
you
this is
have
made
to
in India, so it's good. So how do
you
we
have to
get
do
that?
it. You have to physically do it, Nanju. You have to physically create a business that demonstrates it. Okay, so I have about 5 different businesses that I've just described to you, which are demonstrating this. Which are one very simple business, which has been very interesting, my cycling business. Second one is this wind-powered business. Third one is electric vehicles. Battery manufacturing. And you have to demonstrate this. You have to put this into practice. You have to, and the UAE business as well. So we've actually done this. We've actually demonstrated this because people like success, right? And they need people who are going to lead and make things happen. And it's only by demonstrating this and actually making things happen and getting this right that you actually make progress. And so, part of that as well is, I do a lot of talks as well. So I do speak at government events. I speak at all kinds of conferences and things. And I make myself really unpopular. So you've got to make yourself really unpopular, right? And people, the last talk I did, I made a list. I was listening to all the talks around hydrogen and electric vehicles. And I was going to rip the whole thing to pieces. But that would have been so indigestible for the audience. They could not have coped with that. It was like black and white. So what I thought I'd do, and I changed my speech just at the last minute, and without any preparation, I said I need to have to change this because people are not going to be able to digest. I talked about how did I actually address this in terms of getting the strategy at national level right in the UAE, or the draft of the strategy in the UAE, which is a whole raft of specific projects which are fixing specific issues which are specific to the UAE and their challenges in a non-ideological way, taking into account all of these different factors, as well as doing some analysis. So I've got some analysis which I'm happy to share with you, which you can build the same model in India. It's relatively simple, but it's basically taking energy, right? So if you take the diesel, there's 1 billion cars on the, in fact, no, it does include, I did it for the whole world, but it takes 1 billion cars on the planet burning diesel, right? And it shows what's happening to the energy consumption, converting all of those vehicles to electric vehicles, right? And what's the material consumption? What are the big issues? And it's quite interesting that the diesel basically switches to 3 things. One is there's a vast amount of power making batteries, right? So if you look, there's about 30% making batteries. There's about 30% recycling lithium-ion batteries. We're going to have to recycle lithium-ion batteries. And in terms of one factor, right, that will cause business to succeed or fail in the lithium-ion market is designed for recyclability, right? So, and I said this going back to the British Volt, that need to design for recyclability. In fact, British Volt didn't set the bar high enough technologically to make sure this was going to happen. And then the third one is, what is it? Can't remember. There's another one, which is roughly a third of something else. So it basically, and it looks at energy, and then you can ask the question really simply. This is totally ideological free, right? So no one's saying green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, because that's all ideology, right? This is just pure energy. So then you can say, well, this is the energy required, and it's a vast amount of energy, right? There's a big transition. So all of that power, right, is switching from diesel, and that power has to come out the grid, right? Which is a huge amount of energy. It has to come out the grid. And that's where that very big figure comes from energy generation, which is nuclear and all these other investments in the grid and infrastructure, because the electric infrastructure, vast development, and that sort of creates at the top level. Then well, if you're going to win in this market, that's the sort of mindset you need to have. How am I going to address these problems? How can I design batteries? Does it need to be lithium ion? I don't honestly know the answer to this question. I'm not so tied into
what battery technology are you working on for your own battery manufacturing?
Well, it's basically setting up a plant using hybrid different types of technology, with multiple different types of partnerships to get this decision making right. So not being
But
specific,
catering to which electronic consumer goods,
no,
or is it for
automotive,
the automotive?
yeah.
Okay.
So, but it's about creating the right infrastructure to enable your infrastructure to be able to be switched, let's say from a sodium battery to a lithium battery, right? Now,
so there's no other factory. You're building the first one in UK.
There's only one Chinese factory in northeast of England.
Oh, that's also Chinese, is it? Okay.
That's Chinese, yeah, which is very worrying. It's Envision factory. Envision's interesting. That was a Japanese company bought by the Chinese, and the Japanese absolutely hate the Chinese. So how on earth they ever let that happen, I'd have no idea. But yeah, it's but I think it shows the level of concern that the automotive industry has.
When will you be ready? When will your factory be ready to ship?
2025, I think, is the current plan.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's a lot of work doing these things that we've just talked about. And part of my role is to develop the team in the way I've just described, because the winning thinking program that I run is actually the summation. These books I've written, right? These books I've written, this one of them is related to EDI.
Can you hold it closer to you because of the backgrounds we can't see? Yeah.
This is one around equity, diversity, inclusion, which is related to that. Yeah. This whole subject. It's one of the 5 books.
Well, Tom, how do you manage? You run 5 different businesses, different continents, right? And you also speak, you evangelize a lot of these things, and you also write, you also cycle.
Yeah. I'm very selective. I say no a lot. Nanju. I say no a lot, and I play to my strengths. Do you remember what I said to you was I spent my whole career making myself obsolete, right? So the main
thing is that's a fantastic statement, because I think every business has to start with saying, what is the problem I'm solving?
Yeah.
And the ideal goal should be that I solve it to the extent that I should become obsolete, right? I should be trying to find a new problem to solve, but which doesn't happen. They want to sustain the problem.
I've spent my whole career doing that. So that's the reason why, and my focus is to create, my diary is clear. Not only I've made time for this call, and I appreciate this and I value this time, because it's a good challenge to my own thinking. But my focus is to create my diary, to keep my diary as clear as possible, Nanju. Right. So because if you think about a leader, if a leader has no time, what use are they to anybody? Yeah. Totally useless. And also when it comes to company turnaround, my winning thinking program only takes about 3/4 of a day. And that delivers huge. I mean, I've just talked about some of the psychological aspects, which we haven't talked about in much detail. They're in my books. But that when you get the psychology of a team right, and you understand what's driving you, what's holding you back, then you fly. And so I used to spend 6 months turning companies around. Now I spend 3/4 of a day doing that, right? With leadership teams, because they can do it themselves. And I can go, and then I can just provide remote support. And in the same way, when I take a board role, what's the best use of my time? So this tidal power business, what's the best use of my time? I don't, it's not a best use of my time to be CEO, but I propose that my role should be director of partnerships, to head up the partnerships, right? So what I'm talking.
So, Tom, can I ask you a question now? Just step back in your turnaround roles.
Yeah.
What are the 3 questions you ask? Don't have to have the answers to it, but just the 3 questions. I thought it may set a lot of people thinking, including me. So.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the main question to ask, right, is
one question. Yeah.
The main question to ask, which is the starting point of everything. Well, I'll give you 3 questions. I'll give you 3 answers, if you like. But the main question to ask is, over the last 5 years, if you take your blockchain business, Nanju, whatever business you want to take, or another business, say what were the what were the challenges you had, right, in that business, and what were the decisions you made? Okay. Now, when I listened to the answer to that question, and I asked business leaders to walk through that, I can see that what's driven that business and the psychology, which has got it to where it's got to, right? So, for example, in your business, at some stage, you started to give away your blockchain. So that would be a big alarm.
Yep.
That would be a big alarm bell to me, but I don't know the full journey. Okay, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but if I understood that journey, because then you can understand, I can see where you are, right, and what's the thinking that's driven you to where you've got to, and then the winning thinking program is about then how do you address that thinking to, or make people aware of that thinking, because very often people are not aware of what's driven them to get to where they've got to, right? Or they'll justify it to themselves. Say, well, everybody gives away blockchain trading or something like this, some statement like that, which justifies it in your own mind, which means you don't have to address it. Okay, so that's a very simple. So that's the first question I ask. The second question I ask is around profit, funny enough, it's about looking at the business at a really top level. So where does your revenue come from? So in your business, Nanju, where does your revenue come from? What are the costs associated with direct costs, and what are the overheads, right? Give me your 3 main revenue streams, and what normally 2 out of 3 you'd be losing money, right? And one of them, so one of those revenue streams might have been, again, the blockchain trading side might have no revenue at all. So therefore you've got a revenue stream with no revenue, you've got costs and you've got overhead. So don't do it. Do you get my logic? So, and from that, you can also, from those 2 questions, you can understand what's their core business, right? Is it difficult to replicate, and is that sustainable as a source of profit for the future? Yeah. What's another question? The other thing I do as well is from a relationship perspective, there's a matrix which I do prior to the winning thinking program, before running it. So if you take you and your peers, so, you know, Nanju, if you're the chief exec of your business, or if you're cleaning the floors, whatever level you are, I ask everybody to fill in a matrix, which is support and challenge, right? So how supported do you feel, Nanju, by your team? And how challenged do you feel in a positive way? It's obviously different if you're a chief exec or a board member versus on the shop floor. So people have got different perspectives, but you can be challenged by your team, even if you are the boss. And how supported do you feel by your team? And you put a circle on the chart for everybody does that. And then, but then you say, well, give me some specific examples. And you might say, well, such and such a person says this, and this happened, you know, specific examples. And then what that does is it gives you a very good temperature of where the culture is at. Because if you think about, if you are under supported, under challenged, you're just not floating about doing nothing. You know, under supported, under challenged, you come to work and you go, no, so what? What was that? But if you're supported and challenged, that's where really everybody needs to be. So, and that of course is related to people's capability, because the person who's cleaning the floor may feel supported and challenged, going back to have they got the right type of work for them, versus you, if you're running the business, there's different perspectives. So, and that gives you a very clear picture of what's happening in the culture. That needs to be done on a confidential basis, but those 3 bits of information I think are very helpful for company turnaround. The difficult part about this is, and the reason why I read my books is because people don't understand their own psychology, right? So we've touched on a bit around the psychology of technology, for example, and you've rightly pushed back, and I've rightly tried to clarify what I'm talking about. But there are some things that people don't understand about their own psychology, which is so important to understand, because if people don't understand what drives them, you know, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and what's holding you back, then, you know, if you can turn that around and become aware of those things in the context of your peers and your teammates, that's a really fantastic place to be. And that's the essence of what I call winning thinking. But actually, you can see winning is a problematic word. We talked a bit about this in this discussion.
Right.
But actually, it's more like mutual success. Yeah.
Right.
That's so I don't think it's less about winning.
I have one more question, Tom.
Yeah.
When you talk to entrepreneurs or businesses about going zero carbon,
Yeah.
so what advice do you give them? Do you want to make it 1 point or 3 points? But how do you?
It's going to be profitable. It's going to be profitable, so it's got to make economic sense. Okay, so has to be sustainable. It has to be the right thing. So I think it's the points I've made already, or tried to make already, which is it's got to make economic sense. It's got to make profit. It's got to, be good for relationships. And I mean, and with a major
you just showed something which was made in China, right? Where we don't really look at how it came from and all that, like even the electric vehicles today. So at an immediate level, people will see the profit in this fashion, where it's not in front of me, it's done somewhere else, so it's okay. So there, how do you address this? Because this is something that I can't see does not exist, right? That's the human behavior. So how do you address that aspect?
Well, it comes back very simply to each, you and I specifically, taking new action to demonstrate that, because talking is no use whatsoever. So I talked about the 5 businesses that I'm involved with and actively leading in some shape or form.
But this is a very long-term thing, right? I mean,
no, it's not. No, it's not. We don't have a.
No,
I don't think it's long-term. Some people get it. The people who don't get that will fail, and there'll be a massive cost. So it's a really difficult challenge, but by demonstrating that and putting that into practice, it's going to be the source of sustainable businesses moving forwards. The rest of them will fail, and interesting enough, China will fail as well, because there's one really interesting thing which may also help this discussion is innovation, right? Comes from freedom, right? So your ability to freely think, and in conjunction with your peers, is the way great ideas take place, and then they grow. Most fail. Most businesses fail, but occasionally you get an Apple or another type of business like that which becomes hugely successful, and that only happens in a free society. And if you don't do the right thing, what you tend to create ideology which creates tyranny, and then you get China's type of control, and that squanders innovation, and it eventually turns on itself. So China, the good news is, will eventually turn on itself. Whether or not we blow up the entire planet in the meantime, I don't know. But the other thing I'd say as well, from a spiritual perspective, and I think this is important to say, is that if God isn't at the center of what we're doing, then this will get worse, right? This will get worse, because it's diabolical, and diabolical feeds more diabolical stuff. So it's very important that good people like you and I, Nanju, do our absolute utmost, not just to talk about things, but actually to make things happen, and actually step over the edge and take new action, and overcome fear. And that's why that's why I wrote my books, to help people step over the edge, to become aware of what's holding them back, and actually make these things happen without fear. Because I'm a pretty bold person, but I'm not totally without fear. But the reason why I'm courageous is because I'm used to stepping over the edge all of the time. I'm conscious of my dialogue, even though it's my own dialogue. I'm conscious when I'm tripping myself up. I'm conscious of when you rightly challenged me today, when I was being a bit defensive, when I was using terminology that was holding me back. So I really challenged myself, and it's really important that we've got this sort of, as much as, and also got as many people that challenge their own thinking around us. And that really comes down to the top 7 things, which I think are to keep us healthy, but it's all about taking new action. We've got to take new action. So when I get off this call, what am I going to do to take new action? What am I going to do to make things happen?
All right.
It's not.
one question, one last question. So I know you talked a lot about what could be in the future, what might be in the future, and all that. But if you want to make one prediction, uh, what would that be?
Electric vehicles will fail.
You're going to attract a whole lot of criticism for the statement.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You can call me and discuss. Call me to discuss. Their pure electric vehicle strategy will fail.
All right, fantastic. I think this is like opening up a Pandora box.
Exactly. Let's keep an open mind.
Right.
I've looked at it based on the analysis I've got. That's my conclusion. I mean, when I say fail, right, I don't mean just fail economically. There's lots of implications. There's environmental implications of electric vehicles. It's the broader picture. It's the economic. It's the unaffordability. It's the carbon footprint of electric vehicles. It's the
from a 360-degree point of view, because everybody's talking only from a point of I drive.
Exactly. Yeah. Brilliant point. Exactly right. Thank you for confirming that. So important, because yeah, if you look at electric vehicle going to the shops and back without anything else, it might make sense.
In isolation, yes.
It might make sense. It only makes sense in about 5 years. When you look at everything else, you wouldn't do it. So that's my challenging thought to end with, Nanju. So
well, thank you so much, Tom. I think it's very important that we need voices such as you who keeps pushing people back to look at the 360 degrees of life. It's just not a matter of convenience, that what is convenient for me to look at, or what's in my sight of vision.
Yeah,
absolutely. We need to see what is also not inside of vision, but it is there. It is impacting me, and it is impacting our next generation. So it's so important to bring and keep bringing people to this perspective, and hopefully this will get addressed. My thought is that electric vehicle perhaps will not fail once we are able to address the 360-degree aspects of it.
Yeah, right? I agree. So I agree with that. But within that, the fossil fuels are part of that solution. I totally agree. They have a place, but ideology
we need it as well. But yes, this particular ideology is right. Thank you so much. And once again, I'm sure our audience and listeners enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And I also urge each of them to please look down, follow Tom. His LinkedIn is there. His activities are there. His business is linked to each of the different businesses is in. Please follow what's happening there. And we didn't talk much about the cycle thing, which I found it very exciting, very interesting. So please look it up, and also check out those books. Do get hold of them, and I think it also makes a great gift if you want to do that. So, and keep following and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much once again, Tom. Thank you so much for making time, and really appreciate your time and thought and the efforts that you're putting in to take everybody towards zero carbon. As much as it sounds so difficult, but I think we need more of you.
Well, thank you, Nanju. And also thank you to you, because it's been wonderful to have a perspective from somewhere else in the world as well. So, and it's been helpful for me to, one, try and organize my thinking, but also to have my thinking challenged. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much.